So most of the YouTube world was discussing the new 20-70 G lens from Sony, and that was sort of the thing that was talked about on Tuesday. However, a little known company called Kinefinity did a small announcement that possibly has some of the most aggressive price to performance spec camera that we have ever seen in the space, but with some things that may possibly draw back and make it a deal breaker. So what do I think? Let's tune in and find out. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is James Jackson. If you're new to my channel, I do tips, tricks, news, and reviews for the film and video making industry. So if this is content that you like, please make sure to subscribe to my channel and hit that bell so you can stay up to date on all the content going forth. So Kinefinity announced two new cameras that they're going to be involving in their Mavo lineup. So now they have two tier brackets of the Mavo line. The higher tier, the more higher end tier is the Edge line, which will have the Mavo Edge 6K and the Mavo Edge 8K. And now we got this lower tier, this more entry-level tier, which is really replacements of their previous Mavo cameras, which is the original Kinefinity Mavo and the Kinefinity Mavo LF. So these new cameras are called the Kinefinity. It's a weird name. Sorry, it's a weird name. I'm going to have to try to take this a couple times. The Kinefinity Mavo Mark II S35 and the Kinefinity Mavo Mark II LF. It's a weird naming, but hey, it is what it is. Let's start with the Mavo Mark II LF, because that one will be the easiest one. Essentially, it is the same sensor and basically the same recording options that was in the Mavo Edge 6K, now in the Edge body with a few things different. And when this was originally announced, I was like, well, what's the difference between the two? Because they're using the same sensor, the frame rates are the same, and it's actually both of them are using the same sensor that was in the original Mavo LF. Well, now that we know that with both the Mavo Mark II S35 and the Mavo Mark II LF, they're basically in the Mavo Edge bodies, but there is no secondary media card slot, and there's not an Ethernet port. But the big drawback is the fact that these two will not have the electronic ND that is in the Mavo Edge 8K. I will just go ahead and say this is probably going to be maybe the thing that sets a lot of people back, especially somebody who's like gotten into built-in NDs and just how easy and how simplified it makes workflow going. I know that's sort of the thing that was the biggest drawback for me. I would personally say if it's between the LF Mark II and the Mavo Edge 6K, I would probably just try to save up a little more if possible to get the Edge 6K, because that electronic ND, it to me is worth it. But if for some reason you have like matte boxes that have solid NDs already on them and you got an array of NDs, you don't really need it, well then maybe the Mavo Mark II LF will probably be a great interest, because the price point is very, very enticing for these cameras. But with the Mavo Mark II LF, like the Edge 6K, you can shoot 6K all the way up to 75 frames per second. It is a full frame sensor, and you get to shoot all of that using the windowed crop, so like the 2:39:1 aspect ratio. But if you want to shoot the whole like 3:2 open gate, you can shoot that up to, I believe, 55 frames a second, which is really, really awesome. So you can still get some slow motions if you're either shooting 50p for my European friends out there, or if you're shooting 48 frames a second for people schmucks like us in the United States. But minusing that, this is still a pretty good option. You get two video outputs with two SDIs, you get time code, you get a gen sync lock, so all these great professional features on the camera, and you still got that wonderful Mavo, that wonderful Kinefinity Kinelog 3 color science, which if you haven't done any video samples with this camera, They are really, really good. I absolutely love the look of these cameras. They're almost eerily similar to Arri. Like, you could literally put these side by side with Arris and just drop the Arri color space, and you can almost line them up exactly to get them matching and looking similar. Now, the latitude performance is not the same compared to the Arris, but you know, if you are working in a professional environment, you can control that with lighting and modifications and things like that. But I think one of the big advantages that this camera has is the fact that, one, it's using one of the latest and greatest SSDs internally. You don't have to go externally. You're using internal SSDs that can record 12-bit ProRes 444. Now, the files are huge, but these are industry standard codecs that are accepted across the board. And honestly, 444XQ and ProRes 444 are pretty much, for a lot of people, is pretty much as close as you get to actually working in a RAW workflow without actually shooting RAW. So I think especially those who want that full frame look cinema camera but want some of the more professional looking industries, and I think the LF is going to be for a lot of people. Now let's get to the Mavo Mark II S35, which to me is the more enticing one, which I will get to why in a second. So like the LF, it has a lot of things. It shoots ProRes 444. It can shoot the Kine log, get that very similar Arri color space look. But the difference is obviously S35. It's a Super 35 with what appears to be like a 1.5 times crop. So that's the main difference. This is Super 35. The other one is full frame. The other thing is that the LF is going to have like more of a silver, like gray style body, whereas the S35 is going to have more of a black style corner, which I kind of like the aesthetics of that a little bit more, personally for me. But the other things is, especially when you're shooting in the full sensor readout, you'll get higher frame rates. So in the Mavo LF, you'll only be able to shoot 6K up to 75 frames a second. With the Mavo Super 35, you'll be able to shoot 6K up to 96 frames a second. So if you want to shoot higher resolutions at higher frame rates, this may be the better option, even though it is Super 35 versus full frame, which is, to me, a great thing. Also, and I think the big thing with the S35 and why this is the more enticing one is, one, it is the most affordable one, with this one being $4,000 body only, whereas the LF is going to be $6,000 body only. And then they have these little pack kits that will come with it, like basically startup kits, where you can basically get the Super 35 version at $6,300 and then the LF version for $8,300. With that, what's interesting with the Super 35 is the sensor, because one of my subscribers, thank you Dennis, shout out to you, pointed out, as well as Pro AVT pointed out, that, you know, based on the frame rates that this camera is capable of shooting, there is a strong possibility that this camera, in theory, could have a readout speed of 11 milliseconds. Now, you may be asking, what's the point of that? One, it's going to be great for rolling shutter, because anything basically 15 milliseconds and under is considered fantastic and great. So you shouldn't be dealing with rolling shutters as much as you used to before. But what potentially is more exciting is those are the same, if it's true, if this millisecond is true, and this is using the open gate, by the way, there is a possibility that this may be the same sensor that is in the Fuji X-H2S. And if that is true, that sensor has an ABC 14-bit readout sensor, which means it has a better chance of having higher dynamic range than any of the other cameras in the lineup. Again, none of this is confirmed. We have to wait and see, but there's a possibility if it is the same sensor as the X-H2S. It's just really coming down to how the log behaves. But if it's possible that we may see similar latitude performance like the X-H2S, which tests have shown you can go as get 13, even possibly 14 with some noise reduction, some manipulation, but 14 stops of dynamic range. And that sounds incredibly enticing. And given the fact that unlike any other camera in this market, you can use the whole 3.2 sensor and oversample to smaller resolutions. So instead of you doing 326K, you can go down to 323.8K or UHD 4K, and you can downsample to that using the full sensor, which is really, really cool. And all of this for $4,000 or $63,000 for an get you up and running startup kit. That sounds very, very enticing, but it has a lot of competition, and that lack of an electronic ND may be a make or break for a lot of people. We're looking at cameras like the Sony FX6 that has a electronic ND built into it right there, and it has autofocus. You also have cameras like the C70 at $5,500, and really you just need a battery, but that also has built-in NDs, and it uses the RF mount, and you can use adapters to go to EF as well and use focal reducers, which you can also do with that. But none of these cameras have a mount that you can actually take off and fully replace, which is one of the other big announcements that Kinefinity announced, was that they're now going to be able to take you could take the Kine mount off and be able to put an electronic PL mount or an electronic E mount, which now makes this very, very enticing, because now you could take E mount lenses, which you won't be able to do autofocus because the camera doesn't have any autofocus into it, but you could take that lens stabilization information that the lens provides and stabilize and get more stabilized footage with good stabilized glass, and also you get information where you can control the iris, which you couldn't do with E-mounts before. There's so many different options that you could do with it. But then of course we gotta look at something like the Ursa Mini Pro G2, which I think it's its next biggest competitor. You might make an argument that the Ursa 12K as well, and either one of those is definitely one. Both of them are Super 35, both of them offer ProRes, both of them offer 12-bit ProRes 444, but also both of them have a RAW codec on it, which these cameras do not have. They don't have a RAW codec in them, so that may be another big hit. So it's like you're not getting RAW, but as I point out, ProRes 12-bit 444, you have so much latitude and wiggle room, you can just make any changes in post, and it's as close to working with a RAW codec without actually shooting in a RAW workflow. And then of course there is bread with the Komodo. With the Komodo, it's another Super 35, it's a global shutter, so you don't have it. But again, if this is true, theoretically true, that the readout speed is 11 milliseconds, it's pretty much damn near close to having a global shutter as you possibly can. And that's, again, using the full open gate 3:2 aspect ratio sensor, which, by the way, the Komodo doesn't have a 3:2 aspect ratio sensor. It has a 17:9. So you're going to crop in a lot more on a Komodo in order to get those anamorphic options versus using a Kinefinity where you've got 3:2, you got 4:3, 6:5 with very little cropping at your disposal. So ultimately, what do I think? I think Kinefinity is really helping with getting those prices down. That's getting more price-friendly camera options for us consumers. Even though with the lack of the electronic ND, that's a real big hit, and that's the only thing that's sort of holding me back. But right now, looking at that and looking at the field and looking at what I want, which is a camera that can shoot 3:2 open gate in ProRes, in a great latitude performing camera, in a great image quality performing camera, which the Kinefinities are great at that. For me, it's while the electronic ND is bad, I can live without it. Just the modularity of switching out mounts. I am right now having this looking at the Kinefinity Mark II S30. Sorry, I am looking at the Kinefinity Mavo Mark II S35 as my next go-to camera for my company. And that is because for what we want to do, it ticks a lot of boxes. The lack of an ND is pretty big, but we can work around that if we need to. But that's it for me on the Kinefinity cameras and their announcement. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know. Leave your comments below. And as always, make sure to hit that subscribe button. And until next time, take care, everyone.